Hello and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome and thank you so much for tuning in. In today's video, we're going to remake this tumbler right here. This is the first tumbler that I ever made. This tumbler was made for my daughter at her request, and although it turned out pretty good, I didn't have any micro bubbles. It was very smooth and shiny. So, from that standpoint, it turned out pretty good. However, it was a little bit plain. It just had the green and white paint and the black vinyl. So, nothing super special. But again, for my first ever tumbler, I was really pleased with it, as was my daughter. She thought it was adorable. And so this sort of began my journey with tumbler making. And since it was approximately a year ago around this same time, I thought it appropriate to go ahead and do a remake. In my original design, I used a 30-ounce tumbler, which I purchased from a big box store. However, in the remake, we are working with a 20-ounce skinny. This tumbler was already prepped and painted, so I just grabbed this one since it was already prepped for me. Now, what I'm doing here is I am taping off the stainless steel, which is exposed from the previous painting, and we will tend to that later. So once we have the tumbler taped up on the bottom and the top, I'm going to go ahead and spray paint this tumbler half green and half white. And it's not going to be a defined line, but we're just sort of going to run the green and the white in together so it sort of blends. Now, of course, remember, you don't have to do this step. If you have a stainless steel tumbler that has not been painted yet, then you don't have to do this, because this was a tumbler that I had already painted previously, and I was going to leave the stainless steel exposed. And then because I was using it for this tumbler, I decided I didn't want the stainless steel showing for this design. So again, if you have a tumbler that you have sanded and you're ready to paint it, you don't have to do the taping off. Just go ahead and go in with your paint. Okay, so we have our painted tumbler, and you can see I've removed the painter's tape from the bottom. Um, I'm not sure why I did that, because I'm just fixing to tape it back up again. So you can just leave your painter's tape on. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add our epoxy so that we can adhere our glitter. Now, if you'd like, of course, you can use any size tumbler that you'd like, and also if you'd rather do the Mod Podge method for your glitter or glitter glue, you can do that as well. But for me, I wanted to do the epoxy method, so I had time to work with my glitters a little bit and not be concerned about the glue or the Mod Podge drying too quickly on me and not getting that good adherence for my glitter. So I mixed up about 5 milliliters of epoxy. I will not use that entire 5 milliliters, but the measuring cup had 2.5 milliliters as its smallest measurement. So that's what we're mixing up today. And you can see here for the epoxy method on your glitter, you just want to put a small amount on the tumbler, spread it around until you get a really thin coat and almost some resistance when spreading that epoxy. You don't want it to be too thick because it will run, and you don't want it to be too thin because, of course, your glitter will not adhere properly. So just Put a thin layer, spread it around, and sort of tap it with your finger to get a little bit of texture to the epoxy. That just sort of helps the glitter adhere a little bit better. We're going to be using 3 different green glitters and 3 different white glitters. I will have all of the materials and items that I've used on this tumbler listed and linked in the description box below. So if I fail to mention a color or a brand of product, it will be listed for you in the description box. And you can see I'm just shaking this first glitter on the tumbler sporadically and randomly, not really in any sort of pattern or method, because we're going to be blending some of these glitters. And I did start out with my chunkiest cut of glitter first, and now I'm just kind of covering in the open sections with my finer cut of glitter, still leaving that chunky glitter somewhat exposed. And you can just go back and forth with your glitter colors until you get the mixture that you like. I'm happy with how this is turning out, so we are ready to put this on our turner and let it cure overnight. Also, do not forget, once you have your glitter applied, be sure if you have taped off your tumbler that you remove any of the painter's tape right away. So once my tumbler had cured overnight, I did go ahead and go in with some glitter glue to seal my glitter. And then we added 20 milliliters of epoxy and let that sit. Now, for your epoxy, my rule of thumb has always sort of been the same milliliters as the size tumbler you're working with. So, for example, this is a 20-ounce skinny tumbler, therefore 20 milliliters of epoxy is what I use. That does vary depending on your glitter amount, how much glitter you've used. Also, if you're using a chunky versus a fine glitter. So that is not set in stone, but that is a good jumping off point to sort of know how much epoxy to use if you're just starting out in tumbler making. So, and again, I've mentioned this before in some of my other videos, I prefer more coats of epoxy, but thinner layers. So for me, the 20 milliliters was fine because even my chunkiest glitter on this tumbler, it laid down really well and there weren't any pokey bits or anything like that. So the 20 milliliters of epoxy for my first layer worked out perfect on this tumbler. But just keep in mind that may not be the case with yours. You may have to go in with a second coat of epoxy, and that's okay. Um, or you may want to just do 25 milliliters of epoxy for your first layer. So just sort of know that it could vary and be different from what I used. Also, temperature has a lot to do with the curing process. So just keep all those things in mind, but that's just a good idea, kind of a jump, like I said, kind of a jumping off point to know about how much epoxy you're going to need. Okay, now that our tumbler is cured, we are ready to add our stencil. And I showed this briefly at the beginning of this video. This is a template which I purchased from Kimberly Hobbs Taylor Designs, and I will have her website linked down below in case you'd like to check this template out. So we're just going to place the stencil on the tumbler, roll it around, pressing down really well, making sure there are no air bubbles between the stencil and the tumbler itself. And then we're just going to remove our transfer tape. Now, because we do have that glitter and epoxy layer, the template is going to be a little bit off. So what I did was I just took the two pieces that didn't quite line up and pulled them off the tumbler and realigned them. So they are touching and it looks like a seamless pattern. And now we're just going to take it outside and spray paint it. I'm going to use black and white, and we're just going to blend the two colors, sort of like we did the green and white in the beginning. And then we're going to be ready for the next step. So once you have the tumbler painted, go ahead and remove the stencil. And then at this point, you're ready for another coat of epoxy just to protect the painted surface, because we are going to be placing some vinyl and you don't want to accidentally pull up any of that paint as you're applying your decals. So again, I went in with 20 milliliters of epoxy, let that cure overnight, and then we're going to go ahead and give the tumbler a good sanding. We're going to make sure we expose a thin line of stainless steel at the rim of the tumbler, and also make sure the bottom is smooth around the bottom of the tumbler, and of course everywhere else. Now, for me, I didn't have any kind of rough spots on the tumbler itself. I just sort of cleaned up the rim, and then I was ready to go ahead and add my decals. So for the vinyl decals, this is a design which I had used in the tumbler I created last year. I will try to, I think these were SVG files, which I already had, but I will try to locate where I got these from so I can list that for you if you're interested in obtaining this design. But when I placed the vinyl on the tumbler, it was actually sort of late at night, and I literally just went into my craft room and started working on it and didn't even think about turning on the camera. So what I have done is I went back and recreated the stencil, and I'm going to show you how I applied it to the tumbler using a different tumbler. So that's what we're doing here. It's the same process, just different color of vinyl and a different tumbler. Now for me, this design was done last year on the 30-ounce tumbler. So I already had the design saved in my software. So what I had to do was I had to measure the tumbler I was working with, in this case being the 20-ounce skinny, and adjust the decal accordingly. If you are creating a design like this for the first time, what you will want to do is measure the tumbler as I'm doing here. And I came up with a little over 11 inches, but I don't want the vinyl to wrap completely around and meet one another. I do want a little bit of a gap between the starting point and the ending point of the vinyl. So I went ahead and sized mine down to 10 inches in diameter rather than the 11 inches. So just size your decals according to the size tumbler you are using. And I always tend to go about 1 to 2 inches smaller than, because you don't want, obviously, the vinyl to reach from the very top of the tumbler to the very bottom of the tumbler, unless you just do. And if that's what you want, then that's your prerogative. However, if you get the vinyl too close to the top and the bottom, you risk the chance when you're sanding your tumbler and cleaning up the rims, you risk the chance of ruining that vinyl. So I always tend to go 1 to 2 inches less than both the diameter and the height of my tumbler. So, but just, you can do it ever how you want to. I'm just telling you, for this particular design, that's what we did. Also, I did use the paintbrush template, and I imported that into my Spooky Vibes design so that I could see how the Spooky Vibes vinyl matched up to where the paintbrush stripes were. So I hope that makes sense. On the 20-ounce skinny tumbler, I wanted to use the black vinyl even though I had the bottom portion of the tumbler painted black. I knew the black pumpkins and the little black cat wearing the witch hat peeking around the tree wouldn't show up quite as well as it had on the tumbler I created last year. However, I did sort of want the bottom of the tumbler to be all black and then for that black vinyl to just sort of creep up into the white space. So even though some of the pumpkins are not as well defined on this tumbler, I love how it turned out. But also, what I did to sort of help with a little bit of separation and definition to those pumpkins is I placed a translucent, temperature changing vinyl underneath the black vinyl. So just as I'm layering the white and orange vinyl here in this example, that is how I layered the black vinyl over the translucent vinyl. This is from Tech Wrap Craft, and it is translucent, and when it gets cold, it's supposed to turn orange. Now, because these tumblers are made to prevent sweating on the outside and they're made to keep drinks cold on the inside, this vinyl is not going to turn color. I think even if you put it in the refrigerator, I don't think it's going to turn just because of the layers of epoxy which are on top of it. But nonetheless, I went ahead and used this vinyl because, again, it is a translucent vinyl, but yet it is still sort of thick enough to create sort of a barrier between the black vinyl and the black cup. So as we're looking at this tumbler, you can sort of see like there's almost a shadow, if you will, behind the black vinyl, and that is the translucent vinyl. So I thought that was a pretty cool effect. And again, this is a spooky vibes tumbler. So it's okay if it's a little hard to see one of the pumpkins or something and you just maybe see a little glimmer of something because that just makes it that much more spooky. So that's what I did. I just layered that black vinyl on top of the translucent vinyl and placed it on the tumbler. Now, for this example tumbler that I'm using, it is a tapered tumbler and therefore was a little more difficult to apply the vinyl, but I used the same process. And all you're going to do is, for me, I just started at the bottom. Now, obviously, you can cut your pieces apart and place them that way if you'd like, such as, like, for example, you could cut the spooky vibes word away from the tree and apply it that way. But I just went ahead and applied the entire vinyl piece together as one, and I started at the bottom, went ahead and got the bottom and the pumpkins sort of lined up and adhered to the tumbler really well, and then sort of bent the tree and pushed it up with my thumb as I went. And these branches, you can cut the transfer paper in between the pumpkin and the branches to sort of give it a little bit more pliability and make it a little bit easier for you. But you can just watch here and see how I'm applying it to this tumbler. That's basically the same process and method that I took with this 20-ounce skinny. The only difference is, again, the 20-ounce skinny was a little bit easier because it's the same diameter all the way around. So with that being said, once you have applied your vinyl, if there's any bubbles or anything like that. Just poke them with a craft knife or something really sharp and push those air bubbles out. You can also use a heat gun. Be careful though, you do not want to burn your vinyl. Um, just a quick couple of blows from the heat gun, and you should be able to smooth that vinyl out. Once your vinyl has been applied to the tumbler, then you're ready to go ahead and go in with your epoxy. Again, if you'd like to seal your vinyl, I have said this before in other videos, I don't always seal my vinyl. It's probably a good idea to, just to prevent any lifting or anything. But if you apply the vinyl and you just gently and slowly remove the transfer tape from the vinyl to prevent it from lifting, then you should be okay. But if you feel more comfortable sealing your vinyl before adding your epoxy, this is the time to do so. I went ahead and went in with another 20 milliliters of epoxy and applied that to the tumbler. Now, while that is curing, we're going to go ahead and address the lid to the tumbler. Now, once this layer of epoxy has cured, I decided to go ahead. I have this beautiful black glitter, and I thought it would look so cute on the very, very bottom of the tumbler, just to add a little bit of zhuzh. And so we're just going to go ahead and use some glitter glue, apply that with a paintbrush, and sprinkle our glitter and let that dry. Once that has dried, I did go ahead and seal that glitter with a little bit more glitter glue and water, and then let that dry as well. Also, while the glitter was drying, I decided to go ahead and use those same flat back pearls to put as the dots on the O's in the word spooky. I don't know if you realized, but one of the dots in my vinyl, when I was weighting it, I guess I accidentally pulled the dot of the O in spooky off. And I thought, well, I'll just cut another dot out and go back and add that before I add my final coat of epoxy. However, as I was looking at these flat back pearls, I thought, how cute would it look to give the tumbler eyes? And I had some actual googly eyes that I was going to add, but I didn't know how they would perform under the epoxy, and I wasn't really ready at this point to trial something different and have it mess up, because I really wanted this tumbler to turn out beautiful. And so, at any rate, I substituted the googly eyes for the flatback pearls, and I think it turned out really cute and it's a little different. So once the seal of the glitter glue and water mixture has dried and the flat back pearls on the word spooky has dried, then I went in with my final coat of epoxy, and this Spooky Vibes remake is complete. So I'm going to post some pictures of this tumbler as well as the original tumbler that I created for comparison, and you can let me know which one is your favorite. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope it has been fun and informative. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click on the bell for notifications. Leave any questions or comments in the comment section below. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to tune in and watch my video. And as always, I hope everyone has a blessed day.